Ever wonder how to make your videos come alive with realistic rain effects? In this tutorial, I will show you how to create stunning raindrops in DaVinci Resolve that will elevate your projects and impress your audience. So let's dive in. So to start with, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a new Fusion composition. So we're going to right click in here, start the composition. We're going to leave it at defaults. Once that's up, we're going to double click it, and that'll give us our media out. From there, we're going to take and drag our input. So we're going to connect our input to our media out. From there, we're going to do the raindrops. We're going to start with a background node. And in that background node, we are going to bring that into our left viewer. So we're going to highlight that. We're going to want to change our color to white. So with our color being white, we see that over in the left viewer. Since we're going to be just designing some particles, we really don't need for this to be full screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our inspector tab and click on the image. We're going to make sure the auto resolution is turned off. So with that, we're going to drop this width down, and while we drop it down, it's going to change the width of this particle system. We're going to put it at about 130. That's just where the raindrop streak is going to actually end up going inside of. So this doesn't need to be that fat. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to take an ellipse and we're going to put that into the background. We're going to change the width of this to about 1 and the height to about 1. That will give us basically what will be our raindrop. We can bring this down just a little bit more so that we can add soft edge to it and do a few things to it later. Once we do that, what we're going to do now is we're just going to bring this all the way down to the bottom. And from there, we're going to then just basically bring this down just a little bit more so that we have some room. That should be about right. So now what I want to do is I want to actually add a raise node. So just add that. And with that, you can see that what it does is it creates a tail in whichever direction you are moving it at. The closer you get to it, the more cone it is. So we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go in and we're going to set our raise node to the center is going to be about 0.5, and our Y is going to be like -50. And with that, now we have a straight line tail behind our raindrop. With this, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the inspector and we're going to mess with the decay, the weight, and the exposure. So if I were to bring the decay down a little bit, you can see that it's actually going to make our tail longer. So we want to create a longer tail about there. If we bring the weight up, it's going to actually make it brighter. So we want it somewhere around 7, and the exposure will also give it more brightness. So we want just about a little brighter. So I don't want this to be quite as wide as the initial raindrop. So what we're going to do now is connect a rectangle mask to our raise node. And with the rectangle mask, we are going to then change the height to about 1. And we're going to bring the width down even more so that it is smaller than the raindrop itself. And we're going to add a little bit of soft edge to this so it kind of just blends in to a smooth fallout. So we'll come up to the eclipse node and we're going to add a little bit of a soft edge here, but we're not going to put quite as much as the other because we just don't need it there. So adding the soft edge is fine, about 0.05. So with all of this, this is basically going to be our raindrop texture. So now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add in a P emitter node and a P render node, and we're going to connect those two. We're going to then take a look at our P render in our right viewer, and with that highlighted, then what I'm going to want to do is go up into the inspector and view this as a 2D output. With the P emitter selected, we're going to go back up into the Inspector tab, and inside the Inspector tab, we're going to select the Style tab. Inside of there, we're going to change the style from point to bitmap. And when we do that, we are now going to create a new input on our P emitter to where we can then connect our raise node to the P emitter. Now you can see that some of the points are turning into raindrops. If you want to get more, you can increase your timeline, and you can now see you have a lot of particles in the timeline. So now these are really small, so you're going to want to actually come back up to the size controls, and you're going to change the size to a 1. That will give you a tail with your raindrops here. That's basically the same thing as if you were to add the raise to the merge node and look at that, except the only thing different would be that there is a offset. The good thing about this is after the raise node, we can add a shift space to add a scale node. And what the scale node does is it takes our resolution and it multiplies it by the slider. So if we were to bring this slider down to 0.5, we now see that our scale is now 1/2. That's going to be half of the resolution, and that is controlling the actual size of the particles. And setting this up lets us have a really low resolution texture in our particles without sacrificing the image quality, so that we can go and get a faster render in the end. With the emitter selected, I'm going to go into the size variance, and with that I'm going to change that so that all of the particles are not exactly the same size. With the raise selected, you can see that some of the particle tops are getting cut off a little bit, since raising this is extending all the way up to the edge. And to mess with this, we're going to change the decay a little bit, and we're just going to change that to 0.004, and that will make it have a little bit of a softer edge. We're going to go over to the P emitter, and inside of that we're going to go to the controls tab. We're going to set the number down a lot, so 0.3. We take our playhead all the way to the beginning. What we're doing is we are now setting 3 particles for every frame that it plays. Now we don't want them to just look like they are appearing. We want them to actually look like they're falling down the screen. So we're going to come over to the region tab, and from there we're going to select rectangle. This is going to tell us where the particles actually want to spawn. So we're now going to change the width to about 1.3 and the height to 0. And anywhere along this line, this is where the particles will spawn. Now we're going to drag this off the screen till you see all the particles are just off screen. And with that, we're going to go over to the controls tab. And in the controls tab, we're going to use the velocity to add some gravity. So let's drag the velocity up. We're going to go about 0.08, and we're going to change the angle to a -90. With that, when we hit the play button, you can now see that they are falling down the screen. We also want to add some velocity variance. So we're going to change that to 0.08 as well, so that when we now hit the play, you can see some drops are falling faster than the others. So we're changing speeds of the drops. So this is actually looking pretty good. The only thing that I see is some of the drops are disappearing. So we need to increase our lifespan because it's taken 100 frames to get there. We're going to want to increase this to like 160 so that all the drops will get off of the screen before they actually disappear. So as you saw in the beginning, there was actually nothing on the screen for a lot of frames. So what we want to do is we're going to go over to the P render, and we're going to go in to pre-generate frames. We're going to go with like 10. That's not really enough. We want to be able to have some all the way down the screen. So let's put in 50, and that looks pretty good. So if we are at the beginning of the timeline, we can now see that we have generated raindrops on the screen at the very beginning. So now this is playing. It looks like we just have too many raindrops on the screen. So we're just going to go over to the number, and we're going to drop that down to about 0.15, and that will give us about half the amount of raindrops that are falling on the screen at a given time. So what we want to do now is fill out our particle maps so that some of the static raindrops are just stuck to the window. To do this, I'm going to be adding a fast noise node, and we're going to view this off into the left side. Now we get all the settings. We're going to bring the contrast up so that we have more separation. We do not want to be able to see where you have a solid little contrast line. You want it to be blurred a little bit. So we're going to want a little bit more softness within our node. So we're going to bring our scale down a little. So we're going to put it into something like 30, and then we're going to bring the brightness down. And in this case, we can't bring it down enough. So we're going to type in the box like -2, and then maybe up the contrast a little bit so that we can get a nice raindrop. So when we up the contrast, you can see that we're starting to get some raindrops. So what we want to do is add a little bit of seeth rate to these while they are playing. So we're going to add the seeth rate of 0.014, and we don't want to add too much, but we do want the drops to move a little bit while it's raining. The other thing we're going to do is when it comes to the center X and Y, we're going to want to do an expression. So we're going to type in equals, enter, and then we're going to type in the expression minus time divided by 5,000, so that when it is actually playing, we're changing the y-axis a very little bit as it is progressing in time. Now this has created a small problem here. So when you're taking a look at the fast noise and you're looking down at the numbers, when you hover over and move around the fast noise, which is in the left viewer, you will see negative numbers. That will not work in this case. So we're going to have to get rid of those negative numbers. To fix this, we're going to be adding a brightness and contrast node to our fast noise. And with that, we are going over to our alpha channel and highlight that, turn it active. We're going to be clipping the black so that now when you're looking at our viewer, you can see now that everything that was negative now is a 0. So all we have is just positive numbers. Anything above 0 will be registered. So now what we're going to do is we're going to copy these and we're going to paste them right above, and we're going to merge them so that we can create some bigger particles. All right, back in the fast noise, we're going to set the scale to something like 15, and then we're going to set the contrast to something like 9.5, and then we're going to turn the brightness way down to about -4.5. And at the same time, we're going to be adjusting the seeth to about 1.34. That way we get something totally different and the drop are bigger. Now we're going to change the center. Instead of 5,000, we're going to change that to 4,000. That way it'll change the gravity and the movement of our larger drops. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the P-render and add it to the merge, and that way we will have raindrops actually coming down on top of the static raindrops. So now it's starting to look a little better. To make these a little bit more organized, we changed these to large drops _FN, FN meaning fast noise, and small drops. We just renamed these so that later we can change these and we know which one controls which drop. One way to make these animated ones look better is to use some displacement. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert a displace node after the P-render, and then from there we're going to be adding a fast noise into the displace node. In the viewer, we can bring it down to scale. We're going to bring the scale up to about 5.2, and we're going to bring the contrast down to about 1.7. Now with the displace node selected, we're going to actually go over and switch to the XY. With the X reflection, you can move this. You can see it does some weird things if you move it a lot. So we're going to change this to about -0.03, and then we're going to drop the X offset all the way to 0. So that way it has some movement movement, but the X offset will keep it stationary from moving in the Y direction. Now when we go back over to the fast noise, we're going to then change the scale, and you can see that that is changing how it actually looks. So we're going to change that to about 9 to start with and see how that is. So when it plays, it actually looks pretty good. So now what we want to do is we want to actually add this to our image. So we're going to have to create a bump map. So shift space and create bump map. And with that created, we can now see that we have our bump map started. If we change our height scale to 4, we can now see that we have our bumps. Blue is the lower side, the pink is the higher side. So that is how Resolve actually determines the bump maps, is by the different colors. So now before we actually connect this to our bump map, we are going to create a displace node, and we're going to actually add our medium out to our displace node. And then we're going to take the output of the create bump map into the input of the displace node. Now with the displace node selected and in the viewer, we're now going to go over to the XY. We're going to change our X offset down to -0.5 and the Y offset down to -0.5. Then we're going to change our X refraction to a -1.5, as well as our Y refraction to a -1.5 as that. And as you can see, we now have some raindrops on the screen. So now we're going to add in some blur so that our background is actually a little blurred. We're going to highlight the background picture. We're going to do a lens blur. Add the lens blur in. This is a studio only. If you have the free version, you're just going to use defocus instead of lens blur. They do the same thing. It's just lens blur is a little bit more better as far as rendering goes. It renders faster, but defocus and lens blur are exactly the same thing. With the lens blur selected, you're going to be able to change the blur of your image, and you can add a little bit of a blur to it. You can also change the highlights if you want. You can actually make them brighter or dimmer. So it's up to you how you want. All these are personal preferences, but there's a little bit of blur in the image. Is always good when you have a rainy window. We're also going to add a little brightness to this. So we're going to highlight the image again, and we're going to add a brightness contrast node. With that in there, you can actually increase the gain a little bit and give it a little bit more of a glare on the window, or less of a glare. It depends on your background itself. This one we're going to have just a little bit of a glare, since a lot of light and water usually gives us a better glare. In our displace node, with it being highlighted, we're going to go back over and you can see the light power, and when you turn that all the way up, it gives you some colors in your rain streaks that does not look good. We're going to change from color to luma, and that only gives us a black and white. It takes out all of the colors. Now with this, we can actually drop this down. It actually just gives us a little bit of subtleness inside of our raindrops. We can change the refraction angle to anything that you would want. We're going to go with 322 and our light power with like 0.5. To also fix some of these jagged points that you have, you can up the spread to just kind of smooth it out to get rid of the jagged points on the streaks as well as the dots. And once you get that set up, it should look pretty good. We're going to go with 0.09. To make it look even better, we can actually select the create bump map and add in a blur node. And then with that blur node selected, we can actually give it a little bit more of a blur. That should make it even a little bit better as far as how it looks. So if you fit this in, you can see that the blur is actually enhancing our image a little bit. So it's another thing. It's going to be a personal taste with what you are doing. Now, if you want to work with just the raindrops, we're going to have to take the merge node from all of the raindrops and add that into our displace node as a mask. And once you have that in there, you see that most all of your raindrops has disappeared. node. With our displace node selected, we're going to want to go up to the settings, and we're going to then multiply by mask. That's going to be just that. And then we can change and set up our high and low so we can actually see all of our raindrops and put how we want in there. So we want to basically see all of our raindrops. If we change this all the way to about 0.07 and this at 0, it should be covering just pretty much all of our raindrops. Next, we're going to take the output of the displace node and hook it to the end of the output of the lens blur and bring that back up. And now we are back on the timeline with our image. Now, if we want, we can actually go in and we can add a lens blur to the output of the displace node. And with that, we will be able to blur the raindrops so that the background takes precedence. Look like you're focusing through the glass and into the background, or you can look at the raindrops and the background. So that blur will come in handy. Now, if you want, you can also add in just the text node and then hook that to the output of the brightness and contrast node, and from there you can just put in whatever text that you want. You can change the color to whatever it is that you want, size, anything, and you will notice that in this it is very responsive as far as wherever it is you're going to see the reflection in the raindrops. So with that, you can also then change the lens blur and focus in on the rainy days and the background, or all three at one time. You can change the blur of the rain to make it look like it's not raining. It's all up to you. This is a lot that you can do with this. It's very interactive and very good to use. So if you want, you can add keyframes to your text. You can add glow. You can do anything you want. You can start the text halfway through your video. You can change the blur. You can change all of these with keyframes, just like it was in the intro on this. You can change everything and it will look really good.